Buonasera, benvenuti. Possiamo dichiarare ufficialmente aperta la candidatura di Ravenna, capitale europea della cultura, da questo incontro, perché questo incontro apre le Cinquetracce, come vi ha spiegato prima Alberto Cassani, e quindi questa è la prima delle Cinquetracce, dalla quale poi usciranno delle indicazioni, usciranno dei progetti. E abbiamo scelto di iniziare insomma questo percorso della candidatura di Ravenna Capitale Europea della Cultura per il 2019 con Hanif Kureishi, perché a nostro avviso Hanif Kureishi è diciamo l'autore che ha cercato di indagare l'identità nel senso più lato possibile, perché ha cercato di indagare l'immigrazione, la sessualità, l'infanzia, la famiglia, i sogni, le parole, ma anche il fanatismo religioso, le speranze di costruire una città, di costruire una società plurale, e le speranze anche sia degli immigrati sia degli autoctoni per la costruzione di queste società plurali. E quindi anche usando poi dei linguaggi molto diversi fra di loro, inizialmente il teatro, poi il cinema, la narrativa, con i romanzi e con il racconto, in tantissimi linguaggi. E quindi non potevamo scegliere meglio di Hanif Kureishi per aprire proprio questo percorso di una candidatura per capitale europea della cultura. E quindi credo che non sia un semplice incontro di uno scrittore e il suo pubblico, ma l'avvio di un percorso. Noi di solito, quando facciamo insomma, questi incontri, gli incontri letterari, di solito non ci dilunghiamo molto sulle presentazioni biografiche, l'autore è nato il tal giorno, in tal luogo, eccetera, perché io personalmente credo che i testi siano molto importanti e quindi dare centralità al testo non dico che sia più importante dell'autore, ma è sicuramente più importante della vita di un autore, insomma, indagare la vita, cosa ha fatto, cosa non ha fatto. E infatti siamo molto lieti perché subito dopo questa conversazione, questa breve conversazione, purtroppo perché abbiamo molti ospiti, Hanif Kureishi ci leggerà un racconto, le quattro sedie blu. E quindi con la voce dell'autore direttamente andremo nel cuore del testo, nel cuore della letteratura. Però per Hanif Kureishi io farei una eccezione, perché un'eccezione diciamo un po' per parlare del nome e del cognome di Hanif Kureishi, perché Hanif in arabo significa il cercatore della verità, il cercatore della purezza, ed erano un gruppo di persone che prima dell'Islam, prima dell'avvio insomma di Maometto, insomma del suo messaggio, c'erano queste persone che si chiamavano i Hanif. Uno era il cugino di sua moglie Khadija, e questi Hanif si richiamavano direttamente alla religione di Abramo, al di là del cristianesimo e dell'ebraismo, e l'Islam ancora non era nato. E quando è arrivata diciamo, il messaggio per i musulmani di Maometto, nel Corano sono citati tantissimo questi Hanif con grandissimo rispetto, in quanto cercatori della verità in mezzo a una società pagana. E Kureishi invece, Kureishi era proprio la tribù di Maometto, e quando in arabo non si dice solo Kureishi, ma si dice al-Beit, e cioè la casa per eccellenza. La casa per eccellenza sono Kureishi, quelli che hanno accolto per primi il messaggio. E mi sembrava molto interessante segnalare questo fatto in un nome e un cognome. C'è la ricerca della verità, poi quello che l'autore, il nostro ospite oggi, ha fatto, cercando di indagare con diversi linguaggi e da tanti angoli per cercare di sondare i sentimenti e per cercare di trovare magari un modo della convivenza. E il secondo punto, insomma, che si trova nel nome è anche l'appartenenza, cioè l'appartenenza a una casa, cosa che poi ritroviamo nei suoi libri, ritroviamo anche nelle sue introduzioni, nei suoi saggi. Quando uno è andato in Pakistan e ha visto questi pakistani che davano delle pacche sulle spalle, delle pacche fortissime sulle spalle come benvenuto, ed era molto diverso dall'infanzia passata in Inghilterra, dove c'è magari un po' più di distanza. E quindi benvenuto Hanif Kureishi, e volevo fare la prima domanda. Il figlio di un immigrato non è un immigrato, perché non ha scelto l'immigrazione, ha seguito i suoi genitori, e quindi si sente di appartenere a una minoranza, perché è in una minoranza, è anche visto come appartenere a una minoranza dentro una maggioranza di autoctoni, però nello stesso momento appartiene anche a una comunità molto più vasta, perché appartiene già alla comunità dei figli degli immigrati e degli immigrati, e alla comunità che c'è al di là del mare o al di là delle montagne. E io volevo chiedere cosa ne pensa di questo, insomma, del fatto di essere figli di immigrati, di essere cresciuti come lei è cresciuto, insomma, a Londra, e di aver anche sempre risposto alla domanda chi sei, tu chi sei. Alla luce di questa esperienza, cosa si sente di dire, anche rispetto a quello che si dice seconda generazione, terza generazione, quarta generazione, magari è più forte in italiano e in francese che in inglese.
When I was a kid in the neighborhood that I lived, I was the only Asian child. I was the only brown face from the younger generation on the street, apart from my sister, and then there was my father and sometimes my uncles. And people often asked me on the street, they said to me, where are you from? And I would say to them, I am from that house over there. And they would say to me, but where are you really from? And then I would say to them, well, I am really from that house over there. And they would say, well, where are you really, really from? And this would go round and round. And so I became, as a teenager, an existentialist, because these are very, very demanding, profound philosophical questions. Who are you? And where are you really from? And since then, I've been thinking about this. And it occurred to me, though, that it's something that all of us, wherever we're from, even if we're from that house over there, we still have to think about these things. And I think since I was that kid on the street being asked the existential question, who are you, where are you from, by neighbors, I've begun to think that all of us have many, many identities, that we are made up of numerous selves. Sometimes when somebody says to you, are you yourself tonight? Are you feeling yourself tonight? It's an English expression. You feel like saying, which self are you referring to? So I think since I was asked these questions, I've begun to think that we are, of course, made up of many, many identities rather than a single identity. So that we might say that we are an Indian. We might say that we are also Pakistani. We might say that we are also English. We might say that we are British. We might say we're a supporter of Mass United. We might say that really we are transsexual, wish that we were a woman. And of course there could be 1,000 identities that each of us are composed of. in a different situation. So I think that the idea that we are single selves, encountering other people with single selves, is a very dull and not very complex idea. One of my sons said to me the other day, he said, when I'm with you, I'm a particular kind of person. And then he said, but when I'm with my friends, I'm somebody else. And when I'm with our neighbour, I'm somebody else altogether. I said, well, now you're getting the idea of what it's like to be alive in the world. And I think it would be a real mistake to think that we have a single, simple, straightforward self. And that we are constantly surprised by the multiplicity of ourselves and who we are. That we have no idea really who we are, that there are people, demons, gods, angels, devils, living within us that perhaps we see in our dreams and we are told about in literature, and that these demons, devils, angels, etc. are probably the most interesting things about us.
Infatti c'è anche l'invenzione, quando uno è figlio di immigrati oppure è un immigrato, a volte è anche inventato. Io ho notato ad esempio in diverse interviste con lei, lei dice mio padre è arrivato dall'India, e infatti è arrivato nel 47 quando ancora non c'era il Pakistan, e gli altri dicevano sì, quando è arrivato dal Pakistan. E quindi a volte c'è anche un'invenzione, cioè l'immigrato o il figlio di immigrato si sente inventato perché lui sente che è di quella casa o quell'altra casa, ma invece c'è anche il rischio di essere inventati e di non corrispondere a un'identità che una persona cerca. Si cerca e dice di essere, ad esempio, quella letteratura. Lei sente questa invenzione delle volte, cerca di rispondere a questa invenzione dell'immigrato o dei figli degli immigrati nella letteratura e ci riesce, o sente di riuscirci. L'invenzione attraverso i media.
I think I'm really interested in the fact that we become new people all the time. So that you may be 40 years old and then you may discover that your grandfather was Norwegian. And not only that, maybe that he was a murderer, etc. So I think I would like to say again that the idea that we have a stable self is a mistake. And that, for instance, let's think about the way we talk about our parents, for instance. When you are 10 years old, you have a view of your parents. When you're 20, and then when you're 50, when you're 80 years old, you have a completely different view of your parents, for instance. So that the past isn't something that is always there to be discovered. The past is something also that is made up. I mean, I may have had an Indian father, I have an English mother, but the place of my father in my life, the place of my father when I was 5 years old and the place of my father today changes all the time. So that we are really fictions. We are fictions to ourselves. We are novelists of ourselves. I was thinking also what you were saying about the truth, as though the truth was something in the world that we discovered rather than something that we made. I think that when we see that the truth is like a novel, then we get a much better idea of how the world goes.
Volevo anche attirare la vostra attenzione che c'è l'artista Gianluca Costantini che mentre noi parliamo lui sta interpretando, c'è un'altra interpretazione di quello delle risposte e delle domande che si stiamo facendo. E per uscire un po' l'astratto dell'identità, e io credo che nei suoi romanzi, nei suoi racconti, in teatro, il cinema, è stato veramente il luogo di espressione della complessità del mondo e della complessità dell'identità. Gli volevo chiedere, negli anni '80 si assiste a qualcosa di strano in Inghilterra. C'è sotto Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, la vita politica era reazionaria, se si può dire, il monetarismo, c'era anche Reagan, insomma c'era una vita politica di un certo modo, però si è assistito a una cosa di molto stimolante per gli intellettuali. È stato un momento di grandissima creatività, infatti ci sono state fioriture proprio di opere di Greenway, Derek Jarman, Ken Loach, tanti intellettuali sono stati stimolati da un momento di grande reazione. Noi in Italia viviamo un pochettino una stagione di quel tipo lì, però non si assiste a una fioritura di, come lei ha conosciuto e ha documentato anche attraverso i suoi racconti sul cinema. Pensa che i tempi siano cambiati totalmente, radicalmente, e quindi non c'è, anche in un momento reazionario non c'è, gli intellettuali si sono dimessi, oppure quello era un momento molto particolare?
I think one of the things that happens when you feel, I don't know how you feel in Italy politically, but one of the things we felt certainly in the 80s when Thatcher came to power with huge popularity, she won the election in '79 and so on. I think that we on the left really felt that we were desperate. So we were really unable to get anywhere politically because Thatcher had come to power and so on. Maybe you feel this was Berlusconi, but what we could do was make films. What we could do was to tell stories. What we could do was to write novels. What we had was pop music, for instance. So although we felt hopeless and impotent politically, that we could continue to make a noise, continue to make conversations, and continue to present alternative views of the world outside of the political system. So you may feel that politically it's impossible to get anywhere because the right, for instance, has this control on the media, on the justice system, on the political system and so on. But there is this other area where we can do really subversive work. And for us, that was in the cinema, the cinema of Stephen Frears, Derek Jarman, Pete Greenaway, as you talk about, and also in pop music and the novel and so on. At the same time, you have new people coming into the culture as well, not only young people, but gay people, people from the third world, people who are children of immigrants, people, writers like Rushdie, profoundly important writer from India, and then maybe myself and Zadie Smith and so on. So there are new people piling into the culture all the time, creating a difference, creating diversity, creating new voices, making a noise and a disturbance in the culture that is an alternative to a political system where it's impossible to get anywhere. So you might not be able to get rid of Berlusconi, but you could write a novel, or you could make a song, or you could make a movie, or whatever, and this becomes a way of voices that are suppressed, at least to be heard.
Infatti la domanda era anche per cercare di vedere quale potrebbe essere per noi, visto che questo è l'avvio di un percorso per una candidatura a Capitale Europea della Cultura, come delle indicazioni, insomma, che potessero uscire delle indicazioni anche per l'indicazione in vista di questa candidatura. Poi noi ad esempio qui a Ravenna, prima qualcuno mi ha fatto la domanda se abbiamo qual è la sfida e come vincerla, e infatti le ho detto un po' l'abbiamo vinta perché abbiamo dei giovani misti, dei giovani italiani con cognomi algerini, cognomi indiani, pakistani, rumeni e albanesi, e sono insieme, fanno musica e fanno altre cose. E poi abbiamo un quartiere di una periferia di cui parleremo dopo, che si chiama Lido Adriano, un quartiere, chiamiamolo così, multiculturale, nel quale nasce un luogo di incontro, un luogo di teatro, un luogo proprio di narrazione, di musica, eccetera. E quindi in un certo senso è una ricerca un pochettino anche di un percorso per questa candidatura. Però le volevo chiedere un'altra cosa a proposito della sua scrittura. Lei ha indagato un po' il mondo, diciamo, anche dal punto di vista intimo, come se l'intimità fosse il luogo per gettare luce un po' sulla vita politica, sulla vita, le tensioni insomma che attraversano il libro sono come delle tensioni che attraversano anche la società, perché questa è una cosa molto interessante per uno scrittore, avere un momento di tensione. Il momento di tensione è molto più importante che i momenti di rilassamento, perché è la tensione che genera scrittura. E quindi le volevo chiedere se a partire da questo punto di vista dell'intimo può essere una via privilegiata per esplorare il carattere di una persona, ma anche il carattere di una comunità. E poi una curiosità così personale: come scrivere di sessualità, perché lei ne ha scritto tantissimo, è cambiato da quegli anni lì, dagli anni '80 fino a questi anni nostri, dove la sessualità è diventata un fatto quotidiano e continuo.
Well, the center of the poetry of the West, the center certainly of the novel, and certainly in the cinema, is love. And to write about love, to write about desire, to write about our desire to be with other people, what we need from them, what we hate about them, what we desire from them, and so on, is right at the center of our culture. And these, of course, notions change all the time. That the idea of being in love and in a family in the 19th century is different to what it was in the 60s, different to what it was in the 80s. I was having lunch with someone today who was talking about the idea of the postmodern family. And of course, yeah, I guess I have a postmodern family. I grew up in the 1960s in families mostly where there were 2 white parents and 2 white kids. Now in London, and certainly in most major cities in the world, is not like that at all. So we are inventing new forms of families and social and sexual life all the time. And it seems to me that one of the things that we have to do as writers is to speak about the new sorts of families that we are making every day, that people make in order to find some kind of satisfaction, some kind of pleasure, and to make a context for their children to grow up with. And this is a tribute to the human imagination and to the human capability to be inventive. The fact that we make new families all the time. It seems to me that if you want to be a capital of culture, as you were just saying, what you have to do is to show that the arts are preserved in your city and in your town, which is your history. But also that you are making new work. I mean, it's only the new work that keeps the culture alive. Otherwise, the culture is just a museum, which may be very beautiful and very interesting, but a museum is always dead. What you have to have is a culture of young people, new artists that are making stuff that is brand new, that is shocking to people. That when you see it, you think, yes, I've been thinking about that for years, but now I can see it. And it's that sense of shock, of recognition, that the artist brings. The artist recognises what's new in the culture and what's happening in the present time. And when you see it, it's shocking. But at that moment, you see that the artist finally has spoken.
Infatti quel quartiere che dicevo prima, io spero che un giorno la inviteremo a questo quartiere che si chiama Lidio Adriano, che è periferia ma è centrale, e magari starà con noi una settimana e magari ci lascerà anche delle narrazioni, insomma, per questo quartiere. Purtroppo abbiamo veramente i tempi molto stretti e io vorrei lasciare proprio la voce un po' alla letteratura, al racconto. Chiedo magari se qualcuno può portare un leggio, e c'è questo racconto bellissimo dove ad esempio si dice: si può anche essere innamorati ma riuscire a portare insieme 4 sedie a casa è un'altra questione. E questa io l'ho trovata una frase centrale. E quindi Però una domanda prima della lettura, e mi ha colpito molto questo raccontare il mondo attraverso gli oggetti. Il poeta latino Lucrezio diceva che si può raccontare il mondo attraverso la luce che le cose mandano alle cose, che le cose mandano a noi esseri umani. Una cosa sembra inanimata, non so, un leggio è inanimato, o 4 sedie blu come nel racconto sembrano una cosa inanimata, e invece danno una luce. E il racconto, non vorrei, mi piace talmente tanto la fine e la frase finale del libro che sarei tentato del racconto, che sarei tentato di dirla, ma non ve la dico. E quindi la domanda molto breve è questa qui: si può raccontare il mondo attraverso gli oggetti, attraverso, insomma, queste luci, insomma, che le cose mandano alle cose?
Well, objects, things are profoundly important to people. I remember when my father died, my mother kept my father's shoes near the front door for weeks, for months, and she had a huge conflict about finally throwing away his shoes, because his shoes were clearly a profound symbol of a man's presence, as though he were going to, put his shoes on and walk in or walk out. And I remember writing a story a few years ago about a couple who are divorcing, and I have a huge argument about an umbrella because it's raining. And as you know, we can have huge arguments about cars, huge arguments about country houses, huge arguments about indeed countries. So objects become profoundly imbued, as you know, with the human spirit, with symbolism, and they are part of, it's as though they are part of our body. And through an object you can say very significant things about the human chaos.
Il racconto delle 4 sedie blu, e in questa raccolta che è pubblicata da Pompiani, Hanif Kureishi tutti i racconti. Qui ci sono dei racconti, a volte ogni racconto è proprio un mondo, e ce l'abbiamo anche qui, chi lo vuole, forse l'autore, non so se sta con noi, perché questa è una serata abbastanza lunga, anche per firmare gli autografi. Hanif, a lei le 4 sedie blu.
This is a story called 4 Blue Chairs. People accuse me sometimes of being an autobiographical writer, and I would have to say it's almost impossible to be an autobiographical writer, because you tend to obviously to imagine it in a new way when you write down a story. But I remember this incident happening to me and my wife. And at the end of the incident, she turned around to me and she said, "If you write this down, I will kill you," she said. So I wrote it down. I'm looking forward to her killing me. This is called 4 Blue Chairs. After a lunch of soup, bread and tomato salad, John and Dinah go out onto the street. At the bottom of the steps, they stop for a moment and he slips his arm through hers, as he always does. They have been keen to establish little regularities to confirm that they are used to doing things together. Today the sun beats down and the city streets seem deserted, as if everyone but them has gone on holiday. At the moment they feel they are on a kind of holiday themselves. They would prefer to carry blankets, cushions, the radio and numerous lotions out onto the patio. Weeds push up between the paving stones and cats lie on the creeper at the top of the fence, as the couple lie there in the afternoons, reading, drinking fizzy lemonade, and thinking over all that's happened to them. Except that today, the store has rung to say that the 4 blue chairs are ready. Dinah and John can't wait for the chairs to be delivered, but must fetch them this afternoon because Henry is coming to supper tonight. They shopped yesterday. Of the several meals they have learned to prepare, they will have salmon steaks, broccoli, new potatoes, and 3-bean salad. Henry will be their first dinner guest. In fact, he will be their first visitor. John and Dinah had been in the rented flat 2.5 months already, and most of the furniture, if not what they would have chosen themselves, is acceptable, particularly bookshelves in all the rooms, which they have wiped down with wet cloths. Dinah is intending to fetch the rest of her books in her desk, which pleases him. After that, it seems to him there will be no going back. The wooden chair and the wooden table in the kitchen is adequate. 3 people could sit comfortably around it to eat, drink and talk. They have 2 brightly coloured tablecloths, which they bought in India. They have started to put their things on the table, mixed together. She will set something out experimentally, and he will look at it as if to say, "What's that?" And she watches him. Then they look at one another, and an agreement is reached, or not. Their pens, for instance, are now in a shaving mug. Her vase is next to it. His plaster Buddha appeared on the table this morning and was passed without disagreement. The picture of the cat was not passed, and she won't remove it at the moment in order to test him. There are photographs of them together on the break they took a year ago when they were still living with their former partners. There are photographs of his children. At the moment, there are only 2 rotten kitchen chairs. John has said that Henry, whom she met once before at a dinner given by one of John's friends, would take an interest in the blue chairs with the cane seats. Henry would take an interest in almost anything, if it is presented enthusiastically. It has only been after some delicate but amiable discussion that they finally agreed to go ahead with Henry. John and Dinah like to talk. In fact, she gave up her job so they could talk more. Sometimes they talk with their faces pressed together, sometimes with their backs to one another. They go to bed early so they can talk. The one thing they don't like is disagreement. They imagine that if they start disagreeing, they will never stop, and that there will be a war between them. They've had wars, and they have almost walked out on one another on several occasions. But it is the disagreements they've had before, and with other people, and the fear that these disagreements will return, that seem to be making them very nervous at the moment. But they have agreed that Henry will be a good choice as a first guest. He lives nearby, and he lives alone. He loves being asked out. As he works near Carluccio's, he will bring exotic cakes. There won't be any silences, difficult or otherwise. We first saw the blue chairs 4 days ago. They were looking for an Indian restaurant nearby and were discussing their ideal Indian menu, how they would choose the dal from this restaurant on King Street and the boona prawn from the takeaway on the Fulham Road, and so on, when they drifted into habitat, as one does. Maybe they were tired or they just felt indolent, but in the big store they found themselves sitting in various armchairs, on the sofas, at the tables, and even lying in the deck chairs, imagining they were together in this or that place by the sea or in the mountains, occasionally looking at one another, far away across the shop, or closer, side by side, thinking in astonishment, this is him, this is her, the one I've chosen, the one I've wanted all this time, and now it has really started. Everything I've wished for is today. There seemed to be no one in the shop to mind their ruminations. They lost track of time. Then a shop assistant stepped out from behind a pillar, and the 4 blue wooden chairs with the cane seats, after much sitting down, standing up, and shuffling of their bottoms, were agreed on. There were other chairs they wanted, but it turned out they were not in the sale, and they had to take these cheaper ones. As they left, Dinah said she preferred them. He said that if she preferred them, he did too. Today, on the way to the store, she insists on buying a small frame and a postcard of a flower to go in it. She says she is intending to put this on the table. When Henry's there, he says, yes. During the first weeks of their living together, he has found himself balking at the way she does certain things he had not noticed during their affair or hadn't had time to get used to. For instance, the way she likes to eat, sitting on the front steps in the evening. He is too old, he thinks, for bohemianism, but he can't keep saying no to everything. And he has to sit there with pollution going in his bowl of pasta, and the neighbours observing him and the men looking at her. He knows that this is part of the new life he has longed for, and at these times he feels helpless. He can't afford to have this go wrong. The assistant in the store says he will fetch the chairs, and they will be ready downstairs in a few minutes. At last, two men bring the chairs out, and they stand the chairs at the store exit. John and Dinah are surprised to see that the chairs haven't come individually, or with just a little wrapping. The chairs are in two long brown boxes, like a couple of coffins. John has already said that they can carry the chairs to the tube station and then do the same from there to the flat. It isn't far. She thought he was being flippant. She can now see that he was serious. To show how it must be done, and indeed that it is possible, he gets a good grip on the box, kicks it at the bottom, and shoves it right out of the shop, and then along the smooth floor of the shopping centre, past the sweet seller and security guard and the old women sitting on the benches. At the exit of the shopping centre, he turns and he sees her standing in the shop entrance, watching him, laughing. He thinks how lovely she is and what a good time they always have together. She starts to follow him, pushing her box as he did his. He continues, thinking that this is how they will do it. They will soon be at the tube station. But outside the shopping mall, on the hot pavement, the box sticks. You can't shove cardboard along on concrete. It won't go. That morning, she suggested they borrow a car. He had said they wouldn't be able to park nearby. Perhaps they would get a taxi. But outside is a one-way street, going in the wrong direction. He sees that there are no taxis. The boxes wouldn't fit into a taxi anyway. Out there, on the street, in the sun, he squats a little. He gets his arms around the box. It is as if he's hugging a tree, making all kinds of involuntary and regrettable sounds. He lifts the box right up. Even if he can't see where it's going, even if his nose is pushed right into the cardboard, he is carrying it, he is moving, they are still on their way. But he doesn't get far. Different parts of his body are resisting. He will ache tomorrow. He puts the box down again. In fact, he almost drops the box. He looks back to see that Dinah is touching the corners of her eyes, as if she is crying with laughter. Truly, it's a baking hot afternoon, and it was a terrible idea to invite Henry over. He is about to shout at her, asking her whether she has any better ideas. But watching her, he can see that she does. She's full of better ideas all the time, about everything. If only he trusted her rather than himself, thinking he's always right, he would be better off. She does this remarkable thing. She lifts her box onto her hip and, holding it by the cardboard flap, starts to walk with it. She walks right past him, stately and upright, like an African woman with a goat on her shoulders, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. And off she goes towards the tube. This, clearly, is how to do it. He does the same. He does the whole African woman upright stance. But after a few steps, the flap of the cardboard rips. It rips right across and the box drops to the ground. He can't go on. He doesn't know what to do. He's embarrassed now, and he thinks people are looking at him and laughing. People are indeed doing this, looking at him with the box and the beautiful woman and the other box. And they look back at him and then they look at her. And in fact they are splitting their sides, as if nothing similar has ever happened to them. He likes to think he doesn't care, that he's strong enough at his age to withstand mockery. But he sees himself in their eyes as a foolish little man, with the things he has wanted and hoped for futile and empty, reduced to the ridiculous shoving of this box along the street in the sun. You might be in love, but whether you can get 4 chairs home together is another matter. She comes back to him now and stands there. He's looking away and he's furious. She says there's only one thing for it. All right, he says, an impatient man trying to be patient. Let's get on with this. Take it easy, she says. Just calm down. I'm trying to, he replies. Squat down, she says. What? Squat down. Here. Yes. Where do you think? Okay. He squats down with his arms out, and she grips the box in the tree-hugging pose, and she tips it and lays it across his hands and on top of his head. With this weight pushing down onto his skull, he attempts to stand, as Olympic weightlifters do, using their knees. Unlike those Olympic heroes, he finds himself pitching forward. People in the vicinity are no longer laughing. They are alarmed, and they are shouting warnings, and they are scattering. He's staggering about with a box on his head, a drunken Atlas, and she is dancing around him, saying, steady, steady on, steady. Not only that, he's about to hurl the box into the traffic. A man passing by sets the box down for them. Thank you, says Dina. She looks at John. Thank you, says John solemnly. He stands there breathing hard. There is sweat on his upper lip. His whole face is damp. His hair is wet and his skull is itching. He's not in good shape. He could die soon, suddenly, as his father did. Without looking at her, he picks up the box in the tree-hugging stance and takes it a few yards, shuffling. He puts it down and picks it up again. He covers a few more yards. She follows. Once they're on the tube, he suspects they'll be all right. It is only one stop. But when they've got out of the train, they find that getting the boxes along the station is almost impossible. The tree-hugging stance is getting too difficult. They carry one box between them up the stairs and then return for the other. She is quiet now. He can see that she's tiring and is bored with this idiocy. At the entrance to the station, she asks the newspaper seller if they can leave one of the boxes with him. They can carry one home together and return for the other. The man agrees. She stands in front of John, with her arms at her side and her hands stuck out like a couple of rabbit ears, into which shape the box is then placed. As they walk, he watches her in a green sleeveless top with a collar, the sling of her bag crossing her shoulder, and the back of her long neck. He thinks that if they have to put the box down, everything will fail. But although they stop 3 times, she's concentrating, they both are, and they don't put the box down. They reach the bottom of the steps to the house. At last they stand the box upright, in the cool hall, and sigh with relief. They return for the other box. They have found a method. They carry it out efficiently. When it's done, he rubs and kisses her sore hands. She looks away. Without speaking, they pull the 4 blue chairs with the cane seats from the boxes, and they throw the wrapping in a corner. They put the chairs around the table, and they look at them. They sit on them. They place themselves in this position and that. They put their feet up on them. They change the tablecloth. This is good, he says. She sits down and puts her elbows on the table, looking down at the tablecloth. She's crying. He touches her hair. He goes to the shop for some lemonade, and when he gets back, she has taken off her shoes and is lying flat out on the kitchen floor. I'm tired now, she says. He makes her a drink and places it on the floor. He lies down beside her with his hand under his head. After a time, she turns to him and she strokes his arm. Are you okay? He says. She smiles at him. Yeah. Soon, they will open the wine and start to make supper. Soon, Henry will arrive and they will talk and eat. They will go to bed, and in the morning at breakfast time, when they put the butter and jam and marmalade out, the 4 blue chairs will be there, around the table of their love. Thank you.
Grazie a Hanif Kureishi, grazie a Gianluca Costantini. Non so se Gianluca vuole dare questo disegno a Hanif. Kureishi